Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to the MyWorkDrive version 6.2 webinar. I'm Dan Gordon. I'm the CEO and co-founder of MyWorkDrive, and I'll be heading up the presentation today. We also have Marco Kamler in our European sales division, who will be on the call as well as Scott Miller, our VP of engineering. So just first off, a little bit about MyWorkDrive, what we are, what we do. So we're secure file share remote access from any operating system stored on any platform without vendor lock-in. You can see, per the slide, that we have quite a number of customers. We get universities, governments, larger enterprise, education, healthcare, all of those sectors. Anybody essentially that has Windows file shares that doesn't necessarily want to lock them into the cloud or move them into some proprietary database. They really like working with us. That's why we also have Marco on the call, who is heading up Europe, because Europe is a really large sector for us as well. So for today, what are we going to talk about? First of all, we will take the Q&A. There should be some options to be able to do Q&A questions. We'll take those at the end. And we'll also be sending out a recording of this to all attendees afterwards. So we'll talk a little bit about what MyWorkDrive is. Scott is going to be doing the client side and server side demo. And then we'll also talk about the roadmap, things that are coming up in 6.3 as well as 6.4. And then we'll go through Q&A and take all the questions. So secure file share remote access, that's what MyWorkDrive is. What we are is we have the ability to instantly add cloud file sharing capabilities to Windows file shares without VPN syncing or migrating data. And what that means is you can essentially take a Windows file server that you already have, or a NAS device, or even Azure file shares, or AWS file shares, FSX, and you can install a MyWorkDrive server as a virtual machine, add it to Active Directory, point it to those shares, and now you've got a cloud file sharing platform for remote access as well as collaboration online. So you can get rid of the VPN, and you can add those kinds of features that users are looking for without having to migrate to a sync and share or a proprietary database type system. So we're better security is our focus, control of existing infrastructure without VPN, no vendor lock-in, all the files that are on your NTFS file shares remain exactly as they are when you put them there. We don't put any files on the MyWorkDrive server at all. There's nothing stored in any databases. And I'll turn it over to Scott to talk about the network and how it works.
Yeah, and continuing that theme of security, it's really important for us that we don't introduce new variables, if you will. And so we leverage the existing elements of your network that you have, your Active Directory, your shares on SMB, or as Dan mentioned, NAS appliances or virtual environments, and integrate and run on a domain joined machine. So you're not adding another layer of migrating files, permissions to files, user accounts, anything of that nature. It all just seamlessly plugs in, and then everything is made available to the clients as they're off the network. On the left of the slide there, you see the HTTPS arrows. Everything that's made available remotely is done by HTTPS. So you're not exposing any networking ports the way you might with VPN. You're not exposing 445 or 389 or 53 or any of the other, traditional Microsoft utilized ports. Everything is an HTTPS connection. And in our compliance and security features, this is a long list, but the idea basically being we're going to take what you use in your existing network, and we're going to give you the ability to better control those things. And as you see in the diamonds across the bottom there, how we become compliant to things like GDPR in Europe and FIPS and HIPAA here in the States. And I know there's a European equivalent to that, FINRA, FedRAMP, those kind of things. Really, we do that by never moving your files out of your environment, never introducing a new method of connection, but giving you additional tools. Our software, we work with Duo if you're using a traditional domain login. Of course, ADFS and SAML, Azure AD, Okta One Login, Ping, really pick your whatever you want there. They're all configurable. Some we have configurations for. File type blocking and alerting, so you can control what files you even grant access to, and you can be notified if someone accesses them or really accesses anything. We'll show you that a little bit in the server side demo. We've added in 6.2, this is a new feature we'll spend a little bit of time on, which is device approval. So you may be running something out of your SSO or out of some of your security products like compliant devices. We give you yet another layer to that. And if you're not running those things, we give you a basic tool that lets you control that for installed clients, Mac, Windows, iOS, Android. We support, as I just mentioned a minute ago, pre-auth. So if you're doing pre-auth type functions with Azure, Cloudflare, one of those services, we're fully compatible with that. In 6.1, we added DLP. I know a lot of people haven't seen that, so we'll spend a little bit of time on that. We added DLP for the install clients. Let me correct myself. We've had it for a long time for the web clients. So you've now got the ability to really control access to sensitive directories or shares. And yeah, as mentioned in the next bullet point, we introduced that to the drives and the mobile clients in 6.1. And then we've got a full guest user sharing option, which Dan's going to touch on some of our enhancements there in the roadmap. But you can invite external users in without granting them permission to the domain. So again, not creating new user accounts, not giving you something else to manage, giving you yet more security on top of what already is running in your environment.
Great, thanks, Scott. So as Scott already mentioned,
we're going to talk about, go ahead. That's back to Dan.
Great, thank you. So the methods of how was this achieved? So we have a web browser client. It's extremely functional, has a lot of features in it. We have a map drive client. We have a mobile client. In all cases, what we're trying to do is eliminate end user training. So unlike other products where maybe they're moved to a cloud solution and then they have to relearn how to do their job, with MyWorkDrive, they can use existing map drive type setup the way they already have, right down to even the same drive letters that we can assign. So from an end user standpoint, it's completely seamless. Our web browser client looks like File Explorer, but has all the additional options to be able to upload, download, zip, all the other functions that Scott's going to go into shortly. Mobile, of course, as well. The difference being with MyWorkDrive, we're not a sync and share company. So in this case, none of the files remain on the user's PC. So there's no files left behind that have to be worried about from a compliance standpoint. Anything that's worked on is done in real time. We also have a really advanced feature that a lot of our customers use. So the question being, well, how can I edit documents in Office Online in using the browser or even our mobile and map drive client with that, while still keeping them stored on NTFS file shares? So we have a number of methods to make that option available. We also support co-editing of Office files, and you can edit documents in the browser through the map drive or the mobile client. And customers of ours use multiple methods. The easiest one, certainly for a trial or a smaller business, we place the file on the user's OneDrive temporarily. They do the edits, and then they're copied back to the server and removed. We also have a secure SharePoint online site that can be set up for larger enterprises, healthcare, government institutions that the users don't have access to at all. That is used during the course of the user doing edits. And for customers that want to have an on-prem option, we also support Office Online Server and only Office servers in your own infrastructure. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Scott, who's going to go through a client demo, a server demo, and then we'll touch on device approval as well that just got introduced in 6.2.
Yeah, we like starting with the client side of it. we like to show you, you can go ahead and stop sharing and I'll share my screen. Well, we like to start with the client side of it, because if it's not easy to use, then why would you go through the server work? And I think we do fulfill that promise that Dan made at the top, which is it's really easy to use, and we've been iterating over this for a number of years. So let me just get a couple things off my screen here, make this easy. Everyone should have my desktop. I'm going to start you with the web client. This is just the easy to use. There's no plugins. Anyone who happens to know the server URL or has it bookmarked or in their email or is getting to it through an SSO and a portal can get on here. I have a bookmark. This login, as we've talked about, could be an SSO, so they might not even see this login screen. They might get passed over to Azure AD or one login or whatever. And of course, if they're already signed in, beauty of SSO, they're just going to get logged in. I like to joke that the hardest part of using the web client is knowing the URL. And the fact of the matter is, so many of these SSOs now have portals built in that you might literally just be signing into Office and clicking the link for your MyWorkDrive server, and you're just logged in. So again, no new username or password here. Lots of familiar names on the attendee list. So for some of you, this will just be a little bit of a refresher, but if anyone's new, of course, want to make sure we get through the important stuff. You'll see immediately off the top, my user account is experiencing some of that enhanced security. I have what we've labeled as a DLP share or a delete share with extra restriction. I'll touch on that in just a moment, but we immediately informed the user. You would also get informational dialogues if you had blocked particular files or had adjusted the size limits, and you can control whether those dialogues show up or not. So you also have that measure of control. Of course, as Dan mentioned, you've got a folder stack. This folder stack behaves like Explorer in that you can expand it or you can click into it. I've now got files. You've already seen that I touched on something and I immediately had a preview. I've got a menu here where I can do operations based on what I click on. You'll get different functions, cut, copy, paste, new. You've also got a context menu. So this is all very Windows Explorer familiar. If I want to edit or view a file, simply double click on it and it will happen to load. This is our demo server, so there's just test sample documents on here. If you're going into our viewer, you'll get this view of it. This should probably be rotated. Good news, there's a rotate button. If you are opening an Office document, Dan mentioned that integration with Office Online. Let me go ahead and open the market definition document. This takes you right over to Office Online. We're in a preview of this just because it loads faster, and so often we find that users don't know quite what they want, so they just are going to open the view. Of course, I can click edit. Then I'm going into the full Office Online editing. As Dan mentioned, you might do it with Office Online. Oh, I'm prompted to sign in. I won't bother. I won't take your time showing you that, but you might do this with the user's OneDrive account. You might do it with SharePoint Service Mode. We have documentations and questions, and I should mention, I noticed quite a few new folks had joined the call since our introduction. If you have questions about this, certainly drop them into the Q&A section. We will answer questions at the end of the call. If you have specific questions about your environment, if you're new, feel free to reach out to Rick in sales, sales@myworkdrive.com, or you can reach out to us on the support team if you're an existing client, or new clients are welcome to too there. Support at MyWorkDrive. We'll be happy to help you with environment specific questions, but if you have general questions, certainly drop them in the Q&A tab and we'll answer them at the end. If I look at this restricted share, I get essentially the same view, right? I've still got that viewer. I can still look at the picture. This is actually a different folder, but we have some of the same pictures, some of the same items in it. But when I go to that restricted share, now I'm going to get those extra security functions. I'm going to get a watermark, internal use only. I'm going to get a ribbon of date and timestamp. So if I screen grab this, take a picture of it with my camera, of course, you can't download it. We've restricted downloading in the restricted view. But you get that extra enhancement of security. And you have the option for Office documents if you want to allow users to edit them or not. So something I failed to mention and was remiss on the demo share is you don't just have Office Online as an option for editing. You can right click and say, and excuse me, I got to move the Zoom ribbon here. you can say edit in local app, and you can take this down to desktop Word if you have desktop Word installed. And again, you can control whether you want these options to exist. I'll touch on them from a security standpoint in the server side demo. But we've removed the ability to go to local app editing with DLP. So now you get a restricted set of what you can do with this, who you can share it with. This is just going to be internal. You can't move it out, those kind of things. So that's web client. Again, really pretty simple, easy to use once you know how to sign into it. Doesn't require a browser plugin, works on all major browsers. Obviously, we're all moving off of IE. So let me show you, but you know, it works in IE, but you know, Chrome, Firefox, Safari, those kind of things. So let me show you, I'll go ahead and sign out just because I want this browser clean for later on. And I'll show you the MapDrive experience. Now in the MapDrive experience, the MapDrive client is an installer that you would install on your users' workstations, or you would give them a link to install themselves. It uses that same server URL and that same login information. Again, you're not creating new logins. You can use SSO if you have that configured. Again, once they hit this, they'll just get passed over to the SSO. They might already be signed in. They might not even go through this login experience. Script the install, run it, startup, hide all these windows. There's this host of functionality to make this thing work. But here's the beauty of it. Here's what it's going to do. The user logs in. This, again, being the hardest part, is just simply being logged in. And what it gives us is it gives us network drives. And as Dan mentioned, you control what these drive letters are. I'll show you that in a minute in the server demo. I hate saying that. I apologize to everyone, but I promise you I'll get there. And these are the exact same shares that we just had, if you recognize the names, demo share, DLP share in my home folder, as we just saw in the web client, because it all interoperates seamlessly. Some users can be on the web client, some users can be in the MapDrive client. File locking, all those things just interoperate seamlessly. Again, still looks like Windows Explorer, still super easy to use. Now, of course, if I double click on these documents, which one do we usually open? The executive summary, marketing, definition. But now, of course, I'm opening it in local Word because I'm on my desk, but you can see it just opens just like I'm in a, oh, and of course, Office wants updates, but it just opened as if I was at my desk. But as Dan mentioned, we're not sync and share. This file didn't exist. If you think back to that slide I talked about a little bit ago with the HTTPS and the way this whole thing works, this file was brought to my machine when I double clicked it. I edited it. When I closed it, it was written back to the server. So that's the security side of how this works. And of course, you didn't see it because I didn't have any file blocking or file size limits, but when I signed in, I could have gotten a dialog box with those limitations and warnings, just like we did on the web client. I just don't have, and again, you can control whether you want them to show. On the desktop, there's a don't show this again option. So lots of different, sort of common convention controls. Now, if I were to look at that restricted share, it tells me it's restricted. Don't worry about this little ID over here. That's just because I happen to have a view turned on to see it. Again, it looks just like Windows Explorer, right? The user is going to be totally comfortable seeing all of these things. But now if I interact with something, like I'll double click on that file, it's no longer opening it on the local computer because the local computer doesn't have access to it. When I double click it, it's opening up in the browser, right? You get that same limitation of double click or right click, and we'll do the same thing with these. Now, in this case, like in the online web client, you had the option to allow them to edit it locally. In this case, if it's a restricted share, you don't. The only thing you're going to get is edit online. And of course, if I right click, I've got a much more limited subset. Let me get off of a particular file. Get up here. I've got a much more limited subset of functions I can do, right? You saw that a minute ago. I can't actually do anything with this. So full restrictions, drag and drop is blocked, right? Whereas in the traditional share, why it all just works the way you would expect it to, and I can drag and drop however I want to. I can, move files around. And again, these things only exist at the point you take action on them. So MapDrive mobile. Oh, and MapDrive exists for the Mac OS. It doesn't do drive letters the same way because obviously those of you who know Mac OS, it doesn't do drive letters. It does mounted volumes, but we mount volumes, integrate again with the file system driver. And we probably should have had on our roadmap slide, but I think we didn't. Some enhancements on the Mac client. So I'll mention those when we get over to that slide as well. I'll interrupt Dan. The last thing I want to show you on clients before we jump into server, I want to show you the mobile client and I've just got a little slideshow of that because it's easier than trying to connect a mobile phone, but it's an app that you download from the app stores. It's works for Android and iOS. This happens to be in Android just because we always demo iOS and I happen to have one handy. Common login process, again, fully supports SSO. So if you had an SSO there, it would just take you in. I've got that same stack of shares as you saw a minute ago, demo share and the restricted share on DLP in my home folder. Also, when I took the screen grab, I had another share running, so you can see shares are easy to add and remove. Click into a share, you get that same stack of files. Here's that same rotated sideways photo we've been looking at the last couple minutes. You get different views here. We've got when you click on things. So if I were to click on, say, an office document, like the executive summary, that market definition, I've got the ability to edit it or download it, view it, sort of same functionality. And if you're in a restricted share, this functionality is trimmed, so you don't have quite all the same things. And if you touch the plus button up here, you've got the ability to do some basic functions that you would need when you're on a mobile device, like creating a new folder or creating your office documents, or actually uploading from your device, which is something a lot of people do. It's a very common workflow, very commonly used, that people will upload images from their mobiles or tablets. Of course, fully supports iPads and the Android tablets as well. So let's get out of this slideshow. Let's get into server administration here. And just like the clients and their permissions and their user accounts, we don't create user accounts for server administration either. Once you install the server, I should probably back up and just give you the quick highlight on the installation. MyWorkDrive runs on any Windows domain join server, 2016, 2019. We support 2022. You need pretty much a bare minimum to run it, two cores, 4 gig of RAM, just to do, basic trial. You can even probably trim that back a little bit if you're just really testing, but we'd like you to have a good experience when you're testing. The actual amount of resources you'll need will depend on your users, the performance of your environment, the utilization, but we've got a guide for that. There's a whole spreadsheet and calculation guide you can use up on our support docs. And of course, reach out to us if you have questions about how that works. But you get on the desktop a MyWorkDrive control panel. It has a link to the admin panel. It also has some functionality we may use when we're doing support with you. Literally go to this URL, which I'm going to do from here just because I want to make sure I load the right browser. And you get a login screen. Looks very much the same. Of course, this time we're looking for an administrator user. We're looking for someone who has local machine or domain administration rights. Really, I like to say the user who can sign into can remote into the server generally has adequate permission to this. But again, there is no separate administrative user. The first time you sign in, you actually won't get this screen. You'll get the wizard. What the wizard does is it walks you through establishing your first share, making your first share available via MyWorkDrive, and also some steps to put the server online, connecting with a Cloud Web connector, setting some security options, and enabling Office Online. Once you've been set up once, your initial landing point is shares, because that's where most of the operations you would do, adding another share, editing permissions are going to be after the initial setup. Now, don't feel like you would ever need to do duplicate administration and be in here more than once, because the idea behind our product is this thing gets set up once, and then because we're importing all of your settings from, I'll go ahead and edit the share just so I can show you that. Because we're importing your settings from Active Directory, you don't need to go do ongoing maintenance. You don't need to provision users individually. As people come and go from the organization or change roles within the organization, you just drop them into the groups that are assigned to the shares, the same as you would in Active Directory and SMB, and they just work, right? I hire a new employee. I hire Josephine. Josephine comes on board. She's a member of domain users. She's got access to the MyWorkDrive server. It's pretty much all you need to do. And all the functionality you saw on the client side, she just gets, assuming you already have all the groups and shares permissioned. As you see, we mentioned you control the drive letters. It's right here. It's also on the primary screen, so you can easily make sure that you don't have overlapping or duplicate. And if you do have overlapping and duplicate, the MyWorkDrive server still works fine. So if you issue the G drive to 4 different departments and it's 4 different shares, that's totally fine. If someone happened to be in both 2 departments and they would get both shares, MyWorkDrive server will cover you there as well. You also see in this, I'll go back into edit this share real quick, some of our additional layered security, the DLP functionality, which is available wholesale for the entire share, as well as in our granular permissions block. The granular permissions block was new in version 6, I believe. So it's been around for a little while. Most of you should be familiar with this if you've been here with us for a while. And you can turn on or off access by group to different clients. So this would make a little bit more sense if I had multiple groups in here, like I had domain admins and I had an accounting group and a sales group. You can give them different levels of permission. Maybe some of them you don't want to have download, which in essence is enabling or disabling the DLP functionality. You know, I might take this away from them, but I might give it to sales and I might give it to accounting. And I might say, you know what, sales and accounting have no reason to edit Office documents, so I'm just going to turn those off, but maybe the domain users does, right? So you've got this extra security. And that's really what settings and enterprise, these other 2 tabs do. I don't want to go through every single one of these things because there's tons of them in there. Anyone who wants personal walkthrough, reach out to us. Anyone who's an existing customer has questions about these things, reach out to us. I'll be happy to walk you through it, me or
we also have a server setup video as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Our server setup guide, which one of us will touch on, maybe I'll touch on it right at the end of this conversation, has instructions on all of this functionality. But some of the ones I do want to call out, setting up Office Online, you'll do that once. You'll want to make sure you have a tenant restriction in here. We don't on this demo server, just so we can make sure that everyone can access it, but you want to include restrictions to bind what users what Microsoft accounts in essence can access and edit. You'll want to get into adjusting. I mentioned you could control the functionality in web client. What happens when I double click? What viewer do I use? What's my default option? That sort of thing. Multi-factor with Duo. This very specifically is Duo. If you're using multi-factor through your SSO, then you'll use it there. If you don't have multi-factor through your SSO and you're just using traditional domain login, you might consider deploying Duo. Just because that extra security is important. Again, the ability to enable and disable the clients. So if we have plenty of clients who say, you know what, we're only using this for our mobile environment, or we're only using this for map client. We've gone zero trust and we replaced it on our LAN. Why those are fine, you'll disable these other clients. I mentioned the client restrictions. This is how you would enable a block or allow list. So you can see some warnings about some requirements here, but I can go in and say you're only allowed to edit these file types, or you can't. More commonly, you're blocking things that just don't need to be on the environment. Executables, comms, movies, databases, things of that nature. And as I mentioned, you get to control the messaging. So you can have no message, you can write your own message, you can use that standard message you saw when I pulled it up. Again, enabling, disabling the mobile clients. WebDAV is a one we get questioned about quite a bit. It's been stated that we require WebDAV to run our client. We don't. Everything we've written is our own. WebDAV is available if you require it for legacy devices in your environment or workflows that may include applications on mobile phones that require WebDAV for access. I know there's some PDF editing software out there for iPads and mobiles that requires or uses WebDAV. So you have the ability to do that. We support it, turn it on or off. OneDrive sharing and downloading and Outlook. These are just extensions into Microsoft that make things easier. Again, you control them. Attachment sizes, favorites, kind of going to skip over some stuff. If you use an outbound proxy, we support that. You can enable it. And file size limits, both globally and within the MapDrive clients themselves. And of course, some session timeouts so that you can limit access within your environment.
About the only thing I might
Let's pop over to the
that's a little unique is the fact that we also have the Cloud Web Connector, which is the ability to be able to turn on Cloudflare reverse proxy that we host through our domain. And this is a great way to try out MyWorkDrive without having to poke any holes through any firewalls. And we also have a lot of customers that just run it ongoing as a way to be able to access their files in a more secure method, because we've turned on some additional security protocols that Cloudflare supports. in order to be able to protect customer servers without them opening any ports inbound.
Yeah, very good point. So the typical, in air quotes, disadvantage to the Cloud Web Connector is you're running a host name on our subdomain. So you'd be advertising the MyWorkDrive.net domain, right? mycompany.myworkdrive.net. That's really the only, in air quotes, negative. And really, at the end of the day, it's just an address. So on some level, what do I care, right? The positives are just numerous. The ease of setting it up. You don't need to worry about SSL certificates or bindings in IIS or configuring your proxy or reverse proxy yourself. And then, as Dan mentioned, the WAF and the fact that we're running the additional security settings in Cloudflare, and that's actively managed by us. So if you're not actively managing a WAF and you want that level of security, you might consider using our Cloud Web Connector. And if you like what Cloudflare is doing and you really, the host name limitation is a concern for you, we have documentation on our site about running it yourself. You can set up your own Cloudflare tunnel, your own account at Cloudflare, and run this yourself. And it's really not terribly difficult. Of course, Defender would pop up in the middle of the presentation. Let's pop over to Enterprise if you and Marco don't have any other concerns on settings. Of course, our SSO configuration, we have several built-in profiles which make it a little bit easy, but even if you take your own, it really just comes down to the provider, the metadata URL from the SSO provider, and manually exchanging certificates. You can see we have a download, and there's complete instructions on how to do this. But once you enable SSO, not an experience I showed you, but the user is just using the SSO. So it's just like signing into Azure AD. So now when I tell the user how to log in, I don't need to say, okay, go to demo.myworkdrive.com and put in your username and password like you would in the office. I can just say, go to demo.myworkdrive.com and sign in with your Microsoft account, or sign into portal.office with your Microsoft account, or Okta or Ping or Google. Like, I don't want to pick on anybody in particular, but sign in and your MyWorkDrive server is right there on the portal. So this becomes very easy. Once you have Azure AD, that exposes that guest user access that we've talked about a few times, which is the ability to share a folder with or invite guests using Microsoft's B2B. You can see right there, it talks about B2B. Invite guests to B2B. There's a complete setup and instructions on here. There's a setup process you have to go through in Azure. This currently only supports Microsoft Azure, although most people who are using SSO do trend toward using Azure because of the Office integration. So you could set this up, and then you can invite guests. So you can invite, some scenarios where this might get used include inviting in members from a third-party marketing company if you've hired a PR or marketing firm to do some work for you, or bringing in your auditors if you're going through an accounting audit, or have third-party people involved in that kind of process for a short period of time or a long period of time. Period of time doesn't matter. But, you can invite guests, and you don't have to give them a username and password on your domain. MyWorkDrive handles all of that. They're going to sign in through Azure with their existing Microsoft account, or Microsoft's actually made it really easy to create an account or sign in without an account using a PIN. So there's tons of options there if you want to use guest user access. But again, super secure way to maintain files in your environment, but give external users the ability to access them. So you don't have files out in the wild. You don't have a concern about backup. You don't have a concern about managing collisions or who edited what. It's all just done natively right through here through MyWorkDrive. I've touched on DLP repeatedly. This is essentially where you enable it, where you set the watermark text, and there's some global actions you can take if you need to temporarily lock down your entire environment or temporarily allow certain functionality. And at the bottom, Enterprise, not really security focused, but a bunch of branding tools so you can brand the color and the skin of the web client, and also load your own logo if you want on so that you see it on those login screens, that sort of thing. I'm going to skip devices because I want to come back to that, as we mentioned, sort of in the order of events, but I want to talk about alerting and logs because those are really important functions. Logs, essentially everything users do gets logged, so you can see the things I've been doing this morning, reading files, creating files, my login events are all logged, and you can get alerts about those things. So you can be told via email if users take action. Now, alerts via email, a bunch of us, myself included, groaned and said, oh God, more email. We're going to hear on the roadmap about, well, we're making that easier because all these events are logged in syslog ready log files on the file server that many people are already reading with log aggregators directly off the file server into their SIM. We're going to make that process a little bit easier coming in 6.3. But you can get alerts. They're not currently configured on this demo server, and just sends an email. This is super helpful. I use this all the time. Actually, I said I'd grown about get more email, but I use it all the time because I use it as a notification tool when some members of our development team are active on some of my personal QA servers and servers in my lab. It tells me when they're active, and that lets me A, know they're working on a problem that I have, and B, also sort of lets me know that I probably shouldn't do any upgrades or make any changes to any of my servers because someone's busy using it. So that's practical application outside of simply alerting on potentially nefarious activity like, oh, somebody jumped in and they're downloading the entire directory. What are they doing? If they set up a sync they shouldn't have, are they backing stuff up in a way, or, you know, are they potentially trying to harvest files, or, you know, deleting or any of those things? Of course, I didn't turn them all on, but shared and blocked, right? All these things exist. So let's pop back to device management because that's new. And even those of you who've been with us who haven't deployed 6.2 or haven't looked at it won't be aware of it. As I mentioned earlier, device management is a way for you to control what install clients, mobile, Android, MapDrive, Windows, and Mac. There's a Mac one on here somewhere. I promise. Here, I'll sort by this and you'll see a Mac one. These Darwins are Mac. Darwin is the code name for Mac. What devices can connect to your server. And if you look at our environment, we're very restrictive. There's an iOS device on mobile, and there's one MapDrive client that can sign in right now, and everybody else is locked out. And what that means is if they try and sign in, they will get a warning that says you're not allowed to sign in. You need to get approved. And they actually get this device identifier in the warning. They can then reach out to you and say, you know, you, assuming you're the administrator, can reach out to you and say, hey, you know, I need access via my you know, iPhone or my Android or whatever. And you can choose via business rules to decide who you're granting access to or not. Very common to run this in not requiring approval mode to collect data, and then looking at who you need to approve and using the bulk approval functionality. So, you know, not intended to be a work blocker, but intended to be a tool that lets you manage this process. You can, all this stuff is sortable. So if you want to just see, okay, well, here's me. I logged in on this today. That's the login example you saw. But I also logged in on my Android earlier today, and it's now unapproved because I did that temporarily. You've also got a bypass. So if you need to, if you have certain members of the organization who maybe should not be subject to an approval policy, executives, maybe IT staff for troubleshooting, things of that nature, you can drop them into the bypass method. I actually dropped myself in here. So you've got an extra level even beyond of the security of being able to, again, not be a work blocker, be an enabling tool, that sort of thing. This does require client version 6.2 or newer. So if you deploy this in your environment, you deploy the server and you turn these on and your clients are not 6.2, they actually won't be able to connect. What this will actually do if you do that is it adjusts the minimum client version over here. I don't know if I didn't call that out when we were stepping through these things, but it exists. There's a minimum client version. And you can see because we have device approval enabled, it requires 6.2. So users with clients less than 6.2 will need to get an update before they can even sign into the MyWorkDrive server when device approval is enabled. Now, device approval does not impact the browser. The browser is still open for everyone to use. We haven't yet come up with a clever way of securing the browser without requiring a plugin, which is something we don't want to do. But that's also on, maybe not the roadmap, but it's certainly on the wish list and something that we're looking into to try and find a way to do to give you just yet another layer of security and ability to control. So with that, I want to hand it back to Dan, unless you have anything else you want to talk about with device management. I have a few other points, but I don't want to belabor it because I want to keep to my 20 minutes.
Great, thanks, Scott.
I will stop sharing and hand that back to Dan.
And I'll start sharing again as well. And as Scott mentioned, we also we'll follow up afterwards if anyone has any specific questions. We also have a complete setup guide on our support page on the server side that also has a video that records a lot of these settings in there as well. And next, roadmap. So these are some of the things that we're working on that are going to be coming out shortly in 6.3, as well as stuff that we're looking at in 6.4. Guest user management right now, the guest user setup is all done on the server side, which means the administrator needs to do the invites as well as managing. That is now going to be available in 6.3 on the web client to specific users. So the administrator can assign certain users or groups in the to manage the guest user share. They could that share could even be located on a completely separate server for security reasons if needed. And then that user group would then have the ability to go into the web client. Once they go to that share, they'll see a little management icon on there, and they can do the invites or removing people as needed from that particular share for guest users. Server health dashboard. We're really excited about that. There's a lot of times things happen on customer servers, or maybe you want to know what the health of your server is. There's also some easy wizards to fix some things, such as delegation, that maybe a new share got added to a new file server on a new file server, and whoever did it was not aware that you need to enable delegation because you're using single sign-on. We have a button that'll fix it for you. That's like some of those more common type help requests that we get on our side. We'll warn you about that on the health dashboard, so you can be more proactive about where your MyWorkDrive server is in terms of its ability to handle your customers and users. Syslog server integration, that's something that Scott already talked about. We'll be able to point directly to a syslog server to do the aggregation of all your logs. We also have the ability, we didn't really even touch on this right now, there's ability to manage locks on shares. So if for example, there's a user that calls in and says, hey, the file's locked, you can currently go to the server and just go to that share and see what locks exist on there. We do the same thing with session management as well.
Yeah, before you finish that, I probably was remiss. We just take it for granted anymore, but the MyWorkDrive server fully works with file locks with SMB. So we lock files on SMB. So if you have on-prem users or VPN users or RDS users who are also accessing files at the same time as MyWorkDrive users, their locks are shared across those two. And that's what Dan's really talking about, is lock management and session management. These same tools that exist within Windows to be able to say, well, who's got a file open, and what does their file lock look like, and can I remove it? It also exists in MyWorkDrive, and we're extending that to clustering. So that's really the big thing. Our clustering has historically not gone cross server with some of those things. So you'll be able to even now be able to lock across servers. So you don't have to collect or combine like users at the load balancer level, and you can manage those locks. So yeah, apologies that I didn't even mention file locking, because
that's a big one, because
it was such a big deal for so long, and now it's just sort of it just works.
Well, and it's one thing that's really unique about MyWorkDrive's ability to work side by side with existing SMB shares and users. What we've seen other vendors do is move files into a database and then do the locking over there, and they don't really have the ability to share those locks between the two systems, and we've put quite a bit of work into that over the years. We're also adding session management, so the ability to see who's actually logged on to the MyWorkDrive server. If there's somebody who needs to get kicked out immediately, they can be terminated without having to wait the 15 minutes for IIS to notice that their session is no longer valid. External public file sharing is something that we're going to be looking at in 6.4. For those customers using single sign-on, it looks like that's how we're going to be implementing that, to be able to use that person's rights that have said, I want to share this one file for this period of time with this anonymous link or to this particular email. They'll be able to do that. OneDrive SharePoint drive mounting is something that's come up. A lot of customers want to have the ability to use the MyWorkDrive web client, mobile, and map drive and see the user wants to be able to see their OneDrive right next to the SMB shares or the company shares right next to, and basically use our map drive client or our mobile or web client as sort of the primary interface. So we're going to be looking at that in the next quarter and on both of those features. And I think did you mention there was one other you wanted to mention, Scott, or did I cover it all?
I was going to, maybe it was Syslog. Oh no, it's the Mac. And you know what? That details very nicely into a question that's in our Q&A list. So why don't you let me share? Because I want to show people that the Mac actually works, because this is a question we get all the time. So I'm actually going to, Anthony asked this question. Anthony, I'm live answering your question. I'm not typing an answer. So let me actually share. I am connected to a Mac right now. This screen share should have worked. You've now got a remote desktop to a Mac OS. And this installs as a client, just like I mentioned a minute ago. So I've now got a MyWorkDrive client here in my application list. Double click. It prompts me to log into something. We can log into that same server. Again, like I've said a few times, knowing what your server URL is the hardest part of this operation. So let me, and this is a remote session, so it's a double hop. So if this is a little slow, I apologize. But I just wanted to show you guys real time because I feel like we get this all the time, and I know it's something Rick would love to have, is the ability to show this. You saw that I connected. It's working exactly like the Windows client you saw earlier. And same options. Remember me, map at startup, same sort of functionality. Now, this is where it diverges from the Windows client, because when it finishes loading, what you're going to see is it doesn't map drive letters. It's going to give me, oh, I typed the wrong username, so it's actually going to fail. My login's actually going to fail. And let me just kill and rerun is the easiest way to do that. And you know what? I'll just log in. You know what? We'll log into SSO, and we'll log in with SSO, and we'll log into this machine. So here you're seeing the SSO login flow. This is the same on all of our clients.
This one you've got Azure.
So I'm going to get a different.
It looks like.
Yeah, this is Azure AD, but could be, as I've said repeatedly, Okta, One Login, ADFS, Ping Identity, Google, whatever. Okay, so now in my Finder, I've gotten the MyWorkDrive location added to my list. I've got the MyWorkDrive app running in here, which I can also do, an open for, and you can see that I have a MyWorkDrive volume. Again, Apple mounts volumes, not folders. But if I click into this, I have all my shares just as I would. Now, again, I signed into a different machine, so I have a different stack of shares. So hopefully it doesn't confuse anyone, but works the exact same way. I click into the network share. I get my list of available files. Now, this is a QA lab, so most of these files are probably not things I can open. They're probably corrupt or screwed up or anything. But you get the idea, right? And again, you've got drag and drop, so I can, well, I don't want to drag a 100 meg file out. Then I can drag this thing out. But I can drag and drop the same way as I would in Windows. It all just works seamlessly. And you've got a little bit of latency here because, again, I'm on a remote session to a Mac from my Windows machine. Now, I had mentioned a minute ago what's coming. Oh, see, there we go. I picked a file and it's moving out. What's coming? What's coming is an integration with macOS Files Provider. macOS Files Provider is a way to get into essentially Finder or the macOS equivalent of Windows Explorer that doesn't use a third-party file system driver. All clients, what everybody's doing, has been doing for 20 years, uses a file system driver. On Windows, there's a file system driver. On macOS, our file system driver is Fuse for macOS or Mac Fuse. The name's changed a couple times over time. But you install that as a separate component. So if you look at our instructions, there's a guide for that. Oh, and by the way, a question that Anthony didn't ask was, do we support the M1 processor? And this is a 2020 Mac Mini running the M1 processor. So yes, Intel and Mac is fine. But going back to File Provider, there's a native file system driver in Mac OS now, and we're building for it. This isn't ready for production yet. This isn't production released. You can see that it's not all entirely working as yet. But the idea being we'll be able to abandon that third-party file system driver, which on the M1 processor requires free recovery mode. So you can avoid all that, and we'll have that. That should probably have been on our roadmap. Our target for that is 6.3, though it's not done yet, so I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. But yeah, fully works on the Mac. You can see it working right here. I probably should have found a document I could double click on and open up a Word document just to prove that everything really does work. But yeah, just double click it real quick. Yeah, and like I said, these documents are not good examples because this is our lab, but it was just easier to sign into. The other question that got a couple of the questions here. The other one I think
let me switch back and I'll share my screen. And
hardening your MyWorkDrive server, and if it's even necessary, depends on your environment. As we mentioned, as Dan mentioned, you can put this behind the Cloudflare. And Marco actually asked to answer that question, but I'm already answering it. So Marco, chime in when I get done, and you can add to your thoughts. If you put this behind the Cloudflare tunneling, it so restricts what the user can even access that most of the hardening is already done for you by the WAF. Now, I would still recommend that you look at some basic hardening strategies, and there's an article on our support site. Dan, you should pull up our support site in a browser real quick, just so we can talk about what's there, since you started sharing. There's an article on our support site called Securing Your MyWorkDrive Server, and it goes through the steps, limiting the ports that are available, running something like IIS crypto to lock down ciphers and TLS things of that nature. We would always recommend you do those things, but they might not strictly be necessary depending on your front end security. So there's nothing in MyWorkDrive specifically. It's really about hardening the server that MyWorkDrive is running on and your environment. So here's our support site. It's myworkdrive.com/support. There's links to it in server administration. You can also just go to our homepage and click on the support link. The server guide Dan mentioned earlier when we were talking about all the setup with our setup video is linked here. And this guide, this server setup guide will walk you through all the steps you need pretty much to go from a domain joined virtual machine to running MyWorkDrive server, including tips on how to make sure you've correctly set up your file shares. Because if you haven't looked at your file shares lately, there's lots of legacy out there that might not be configured the best for security. But yeah, that would be my answer on security. Marco, you had some thoughts on that?
No, I was actually just going to click on the answer to have everything live so everybody knows what we're talking about.
I can take the next one. We do have a question about file versioning. And as you recall, MyWorkDrive files are stored on NTFS file shares, so it's not being stored in a database. However, Windows does have versioning built in called previous. It's a feature called previous versions, and we do support that. So you can turn on previous versions and use volume shadow copy on your Windows file shares, and we fully support that. And there's actually an agent that you can install on that server as well as the MyWorkDrive server, and that interface can be accessed through the web client as a user as well if you want to be able to enable that option. So that takes care of that one. I also had a couple other things that came up. There was some interest in Azure and AWS. I just wanted to point out we do have images already there. Rather than building up your own server from scratch, we maintain images over there. When you go and sign up on our site for a trial and then you click on download, or if you already have an account, when you click on download, you'll see there's links right there for both of those. And you can easily boot up an image that already exists, that's already pre-built, connect it to your Active Directory, and it has a demo share already ready to go for you to be able to start playing with MyWorkDrive with within like 10 minutes.
Let me follow up on that question, because I have a question that got posed to me, I think directly, because I don't see it in the Q&A list. And that's about using MyWorkDrive and moving to the cloud and virtual environments. Historically, we've been around for a while, and yeah, historically the product was used on-prem by companies that needed to make on-prem file shares available via remote without using complicated things like VPN or opening security holes like mapping ports or having ISPs open 445 or crazy things like that. But increasingly, as everyone moves to the cloud, MyWorkDrive is actually an even bigger advantage in cloud-enabled environments because you can give users on-prem their map drive shares in Windows Explorer without needing to run a VPN or worrying about security or performance or anything like that. And you can it just gives them back those shares. So whether you move to the cloud and you move to a cloud hosted file sharing service like Amazon's FSx or Azure Files or something in Google Cloud, as long as there's still NTFS shares, which all those things are, or the ability to be NTFS shares, mount them in my MyWorkDrive server and give them back to everyone on-prem. You don't need to, worry about, oh, well, yeah, we've taken away their ability to access their file shares. So we get used all the time. And that's really a follow-on to Dan's images because, building my MyWorkDrive server in the cloud is no different than building one on-prem on a physical machine or on a VMware or Hyper-V or anything like that.
Okay, great. We also have a new question that came in around turning on DLP. So in order to be able to see that, there's actually a setting in Enterprise where you have to turn on data leak prevention.
Why don't you stop sharing and let me share and I'll talk through, I'll let you talk, I'll show it as you talk right through it.
Okay, sure.
I can also touch on John's question of where the previous versions is. So let's get back to our MyWorkDrive server. So Dan is talking about DLP.
Yeah.
Step number one.
So with the enterprise version, this is also available to play out with on the trial. This is where you would enable that feature. Once you enable this, there's some extra options there. As you can see, you can just totally, I don't want anyone downloading anything at all, ever. Otherwise, you can, once you do that, you'll notice there's a couple new options here, download or Office Online Edit. We have some customers that might want to allow editing Office Online, that Scott mentioned earlier, but not want to allow people to download files. And because of the fact that the server is placing the file out on SharePoint or Office Online, one of those other methods, and then pulling it back, the user has no ability to download the file, but yet they can make minor edits to it as well.
Yeah, so Nasser, the two steps there would be on Enterprise, enable the data leak prevention option, click Save. Doesn't matter what you do with any of these settings. I think these will turn on by default, and this will have some default text, but start there. And then once you go to Shares, you'll see those additional options that Dan mentioned. Download and Office Online Edit, which work globally for the entire share, and then the ability to turn these on and off individually.
Right. Okay, I think we have a question that came in around mobile clients. We are continuing to do some improvements on there. There are some things that we're going to be looking at with imaging. There's some things on our roadmap. If you go to our site and look at the server, you'll actually see there's release notes and there is a roadmap link there as well that kind of talks about what things that are on our roadmap, and you have the ability to vote on those features as well.
So if we look at our website, MyWorkDrive, you'll actually get taken directly to, you'll have a link directly to our release notes, but our release notes are public information. They're in the, and we've answered.
Yeah, it's right there at the top.
Question there, so I'll clear that one out. But you can see here's all of our release notes, and the feature and roadmap that Dan mentioned is here over on our help desk. So you get passed over to things that we're thinking about. If you have suggestions, I think you have the ability to start a new topic. So you're certainly welcome to. We always welcome suggestions. And if there's something you like, feel free to jump in and vote on it. You can see some of these things have gotten voted on. To the question, I didn't catch who asked it, but yeah, things like pinch to zoom, things like being able to pan within the viewer, swipe. Those are all things we're aware of and would love to add. And it's just a matter of finding an effective way to do it that doesn't impact performance or cause other problems.
Well, I think that's about all the questions that we have. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. If there's any follow-up questions, of course, you can contact sales at MyWorkDrive. We also have, support that we showed earlier. Anybody can log a case and ask a question. We encourage you to go and do a trial. Upgrades to 6.2 are very easy to do. We do support in-place upgrades. We also have backup methods that will back up all your config files as part of the upgrade. So no worries. Our team has always been able to assist any customer in any upgrade. If you also wanted to schedule a time for that, we'd be happy to assist and just be standing by to make sure that everything goes well for you. Thanks again, everybody. And thank you, Scott and Marco. Appreciate you being on the call today. Everybody have a great day.